Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Lieutenant Colonel Austin Bay.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. Thought we'd talk a little bit about some of the go moves that China is making. They're expanding out on the map and trying to get alliances in place and building the empire. Jim, what is their relationship currently with Russia?
How should I put it? Uneasy. The Chinese are most upset about what Russia is doing in the Ukraine and failing at it. And they apparently have not been able to convince the Russians to find some way to back off. So there is how should I put it, a temporary schism. They're not cooperating because there's nothing really to cooperate about. China will not send Russia weapons. They will send Russia technology which could be used to build weapons, but Russia's production capability right now is rather low. So Russia is pretty much on its own, and they don't seem to know what they're doing.
Let me point out something, though. They are putting on shows of force together. It's not clear that they're actually, when they put their naval forces in the Pacific together and sail around, it's not clear that they're coordinating air or sensors, sharing information. But they are sailing around on the surface together and with the implication that we would fight together if a war broke out in the Pacific. They are doing that. And that's a type of cooperation.
So do the Russians and the Chinese have a formal alliance right now?
Not really. They are informal allies. China really doesn't want to get too hooked up with Russia. China at this point is advancing economically in the Central Asian countries where the Russians used to be dominant. But the Russians have nothing to offer. Like I say, they're very much tied up in Ukraine. And so the Chinese, how should I put it, are quietly taking advantage of that and replacing Russia as the primary economic resource for the Central Asian countries. We definitely need someone like this, and they'll accept China, if the Russians aren't available. And indeed, the Russians have made it clear that one reason they went into Ukraine was to reestablish their empire. And their empire used to include those Central Asian states. So the Central Asian states are a little bit leery of what Russia is really up to. I mean, the Russians are unpredictable. Nobody expects them to be stupid enough to go and try to conquer Ukraine, which they're failing miserably at. I don't think Russia expected the NATO nations to pour so much military technology into Ukraine to help them to defeat or at least stop the Russians. And that apparently is not going to change. The Ukrainians feel that they're on a roll. They're on the offensive right now, and in large part thanks to the Western military aid, including tanks, armored personnel carriers, ammunition, you name it. HIMARS has been a particular advantage because it's got that GMLRS, guided missile, and that is doing a lot of damage to the Russians, and there's not a lot they can do about it. I mean, they have some defensive capabilities, but not enough to really stop the GMLRS guided rockets from doing a lot of damage. For example, in the Black Sea, the Black Sea fleet is basically hiding because the Ukrainians are able to target them, and so the fleet, what's left of it, is scuttling for out of the way bases and not the major base in Sebastopol. That's something the Ukrainians are in the process of trying to retake, which would be a disaster for the Russians, but, that's a trap of their own making.
Austin, tell me a little bit about the Central Asian countries and what's going on there with China, and maybe remind me of the names.
Well, some of the more interesting things China is trying to do. You could have said we were going to discuss their go moves, trying to build little walls around them. All right, in Central Asia, their big gamble is built around the Belt and Road Initiative, which is an economic development program. It's really a propaganda program, and it's a death trap for nations that get suckered into it. But with the Russian power was already waning, Chinese economic power was trumping anything the Russians could do in Central Asia. So what China is doing in Central Asia is improving transportation infrastructure, railroads and roads, airports. The joke that you sometimes hear about the U.S. In Africa or other developing nations is the Chinese give you an airport, the Americans give you a lecture. The Chinese are very indiscriminate about who they are working with, any kind of and any government. They'll work with them, try to buy off their crooked politicians, and then while China does come in and build some infrastructure. I'm talking about the typical operation dam. Some gets built. It always looks, at least to me, as if it's something that the Chinese could use if there was ever a security emergency where they would have to bring in police or military police or, heaven forbid, the People's Liberation Army. And this Belt and Road Initiative also has a seaborne route, which conveniently coming off the Chinese coast in the Pacific goes through the Straits of Malacca and connects to ports in both West Africa and Southwest Asia, and that includes Pakistan. And then, as I was describing, it's going by land. It's a land route. Ultimately, was supposed to go, or is supposed to go, to Iran. Now, I keep falling into the past tense because, as with many of their associated developmental aid projects in Africa, the debt is built up to the level that the country that has decided to participate in it can't pay the money back. And the Chinese also failed to deliver on what they said they were going to do. That's the issue going on in Congo now. It's also been part of the issue that you see cropping up in some of the Central Asian countries. I also want to add that they've got a third leg of the Belt and Road Initiative that, because of the look to the Arctic, on the bet that the Arctic Ocean is going to warm up, and you'll be able to send the ships through through the Arctic Ocean and reach Norway. As a matter of fact, they picked out a Norwegian port to be a buckle on the northern belt. I guess I should say that there's something of a fourth route component for the Belt and Road Initiative, and that goes in to the Western Pacific, with specifically Vanuatu is the island that has received a great deal of attention because it's reconsidering its defense relationship with Australia and considering becoming a security partner with China. And of course, that would give the Chinese an air and sea base that is in the second island chain, and that would so they can break out past Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines. So that's part of when you say that they're making go moves. That is both a combination physical construction and also political. And one of the things that I think that we ought to mention in here is their use of maps. We've seen what they've done in the South China Sea and have been doing with their 9-dash line, which was really formally implemented as the standard Chinese map. I think it was 2012, but they'd been passing it around before that. They now have added a 10th dash. That was to the end of August of 2023, published it officially, and it's now the standard map of China 2023. And the 10th dash is to the east of Taiwan. And it drops down and it slices off Filipino exclusive economic zone, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, and it's and dips down deep south in the South China Sea with the ultimate goal of intruding on Singapore. That's been what I've been thinking they've been up to for the last 20 years with all their artificial islands. The artificial islands also show up as part of China. There is much China as Shanghai, according to what Beijing says. So that's a legal and it's lawfare to a degree. It's also propaganda, but it's part of the go move of surrounding and preparing the battlefield. I think that's the way to see it, certainly, because it's a diplomatic and economic battlefield as well.
Yeah, Jim, the Chinese are trying to exert more influence into Afghanistan, right?
Yeah, but Afghanistan is a little difficult right now because it's not under the control of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, what the new government calls itself. And they're probably going to shift some of their interest into Kazakhstan, which is in Central Asia and has oil and gas. And it was always a debate which way the Kazakhs would build their pipelines, to Russia or to China. And now they're leaning towards China. Russia, when they got mixed up in Ukraine, they mentioned undiplomatically that they once Ukraine was back as part of the heartland, they would go after the Central Asian states, and that includes Kazakhstan. So the Chinese have instant access to Kazakhstan, which does not want to become part of Russia, and China doesn't want to absorb Kazakhstan. They just want access to the oil and natural gas. So the Russians are basically overextending themselves and losing out big time because China is standing by to help those Central Asian states exploit their natural resources. And, of course, the NATO nations are pouring weapons into Ukraine to tie up China's military forces, what's left of them. And so the Russians don't have a military threat at the time. But when the war is over, and no telling when that's going to happen, but apparently it's going to be sooner rather than later because the Ukrainian offensive is making progress. The Russians don't seem to be able to stop it. The next, how should I put it, economic opportunity is in Central Asia, and the Chinese, like I say, make a better customer than Russia does.
Austin, what's as sort of just a side note, the North Koreans and the Russians are talking about transporting arms to Russia from North Korea. What's going on there?
Well, what's going on there is that Russia is short of ammunition, and North Korea, I say this as an aside, Dan, I'd be interested in hearing Jim's input on this, doesn't have a good reputation for producing quality munitions. But they've got them. They've got rounds for classic Russian-Soviet weapons, 122 millimeter, 152 millimeter rounds. They've also got some weapons. They had been developing their own cheap drones. If you might recall, I'm not sure exactly when I'm doing this on memory, but within the last year, there have been 2 cases where North Korean drones have come across, overflown South Korea, trying to do something or test South Korean reactions. And the drones are supposed to have been manufactured in North Korea. I don't know that that's something the Russians are buying, but they are buying the lousy, what do they call them, Jim? Shaddad? The
Iranian, yeah.
All I know is when you write about it, that's where I learn about it. But I don't know for sure that the North Koreans have shipped the Russians those drones, but they've shipped them ammunition. That's one of the things that has been talked about. Open source press. That's what's going on there. Russia is looking for something to rebuild its the stockpiles it's expended in the Ukrainian war so far, and North Korea is a resource for that. And of course, to ship it, they have to take it up that rail line and then bring it across the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It's a long haul, literally. But there's the ammo, and that's I'm sure the North Koreans are happy to get, whatever the trade is, probably oil would be my guess. But that's what's going on there. Is that a Chinese move? No, not really.
No.
But the Chinese permit it.
Right. So
North Korea has greatly increased its weapons production. They have clients, as it were, in Iran, Russia, anybody basically who will buy. Now, North Korea is under long-term economic sanctions. They're not allowed to export, weapons. So they have to do it furtively. As Austin pointed out, they can bring it across the Trans-Siberian Railroad. But that railroad has not been maintained well since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's tricky. I mean, they can do it, but it's much better if you can basically ship the stuff out by sea. Now, the North Koreans have made a deal with the Chinese where they basically ship weapons furtively, as it were, to China, and then China basically watches them, as it were, and ships them out to customers without restriction. The Chinese are very careful about that, but if they do it carefully, they really can't be nailed for violating sanctions. The North Koreans seem to feel that now's the opportunity to increase their weapons production. Austin's quite right. The first shipment of rockets they sent out were old, very old. I mean, ammunition doesn't age well. And after, 20 or so years, the propellant has degraded. It's a chemical, and chemicals, do what chemicals do. And for ammunition, that means they become less effective. So the North Koreans see there's a market for new ammunition, and they are cranking up the factories to produce whatever they can to take advantage of the maybe only a momentary opportunity.
Well, we'll wrap it up there for today, and we'll continue to watch China expand and try to see what the counter moves of the rest of the world will be. We'll talk to you gentlemen later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.